Good morning. In this episode, I will dwell upon what is called the Anthropocene, the youngest geological epoch. Well, what it means is the human population explosion after the Second World War, the huge scale of exploitation of natural resources, mineral and rock, forest resources, and massive scale industrial agriculture have jointly contributed to the atmospheric composition by the emission of carbon dioxide, nitrogen from fertilizers, industrial pollution due to explosion of industry in the northern continents, and above all, the so-called pressure on the environment. So we have records on the invasion of what is called invasive species in the various states and nations of the different continents, as well as loss of forest resources affecting the forest ecology. A German Nobel laureate chemist, Mr. Crutzen, proposed that 1951, or the inauguration, according to Mr. Crutzen, of industrialization and the population explosion, growth of very large cities and so on and so forth, has contributed in an immense scale to the change of the lower atmosphere composition, which of course are highly consequential. However, when I look back as a geologist, the post-Pleistocene time, dating back to 11,000 plus, give or take 500 years, has been now termed Holocene. That is, end of the Pleistocene or end of the glaciation, fourth glaciation or last glaciation, and warming of the planet, retraction of the ice sheets and glaciers, which actually inaugurated the beginning of Holocene. Well, the industrial revolution that followed, that is obviously steam engine, that also made a huge change in the way the society, the governments, the industry does manufacturing. And this happened in the 19th century. However, between the industrial revolution and the testing of the first nuclear or atomic bomb in the desert of New Mexico in the month of July 16 and 1945, I think, that added, well, of course, it was a explosion or testing above the ground. It added radionuclides to the atmosphere. So Mr. Crutzen says this addition of a radionuclide, along with the explosion of the population and as a consequence of the changes in industry, etc., should be the boundary of what he called, he was the man who introduced, Crutzen was the man who introduced the term Anthropocene. In other words, it is the youngest geological age. The difference in the Anthropocene on the one hand and the earlier geological epochs are primarily the acceleration of the geological process induced by various types of human activities. But in order to gain currency for this term, not only currency is there, but acceptance by the International Union of Geological Sciences. That's a very critical step. Unless and until this global committee called International Union of Geological Sciences approves this term, the term will not find in the geological time scale. That is one. Number two, there is what's called under the aegis of International Union of Geological Sciences, what is called the International Committee on Stratigraphy. The International Committee on Stratigraphy is actually vested with identifying what is called type sections, type areas, as it is called by geologists, for the shift in a marker rock or marker horizon indicating a change in the geological processes. So, this committee, ICS, was naturally appointed an international working group to check out the proposal of Crutzen. The question is, some of the geologists followed the post-Second World War 1951 year at the beginning of Anthropocene, while another powerful group is in the International Geological Sciences, Union of International Geological Sciences. They elected or opted as the Industrial Revolution date and the strata, sediments, organic, inorganic sediments, whatever, and they preserved the other characteristics preserved in this sediment as the beginning of Anthropocene. Well, something like of the order of 20 different type areas were identified by the subcommittee of the International Committee on Stratigraphy, out of which several sections, let us say, type sections, were in the marine environment. Equally, a good number were also identified on the terrestrial environments, but in the lacustrine environments. And luckily for the Canadians, Lake Crawford in the province of Ontario got the hat. In other words, the working group examined the Lake Ontario sediment. One good thing about the Lake Ontario sediment is, or Crawford Lake sediment is, firstly, it is in a limestone terrain. Secondly, it is a large sinkhole. Well, geologists will quickly catch what a sinkhole is. In other words, limestone is subject to large-scale dissolution by the natural waters, and caves and caverns are usual naturally in the limestone terrains. And under a certain condition, when the surface becomes thin and fragile, the topmost layer of the limestone will collapse down to the basin, downward to the bottom. Because when I say bottom, once you have a situation where the bottom, internally there is a dissolution process over the long periods of time, then there will be the thin surface cover of the limestone, which ultimately will collapse and create a lake. Those lakes are called, those hollows are called sink holes, because everything sank. And given the environment, climatic environment, it will be either filled with snow and water or only with water. So this lake in Ontario, Canada, was one of those. There are many sinkholes and lakes all across the world in limestone terrains. That's a different matter. This qualified as a suitable candidate. The reason is, this particular lake was screened by geologists, geochemists, and what is called the radiochemistry researchers or radiochronology researchers. The reason is, the sediment that had accumulated, because it accumulated within an area which is deficient of oxygen, also were deficient of any invertebrate aquatic life. So that qualified the sediment again. In other words, if the waters are oxic and the sediment also will be oxic or oxygenated, if you want to say it that way, and then there will be a battalion of organisms that will thrive within the sediment as well as in the water. And geologists use the word churn up. In other words, they dig down through the sediment and then bore upward in the sediment, finally, ultimately, making it useless, quote unquote useless, for any geostratigraphic work. In other words, the sediment will be homogenized. In other words, the older material will be mixed with the younger material with again mixed with this not so older material. It's all churned up so that using the sediment to make a scientific judgment on the rate of sedimentation or on the increase or variability of the chemical aspects, chemical presence or absence of chemical ions, including radionuclides in the sediment. So, this lake in Ontario got the title as one of those lakes, inland lakes, that qualifies qualifies as a type area for Anthropocene. Well, this year, toward the end of the year, next half of this year, not even next half, nearly last quarter of the year, the subcommittee is going to report back to the International Union of Geological Sciences about the candidacy of this precious lake in Ontario as a marker of Anthropocene. And Professor Crutzen, a European Nobel laureate in chemistry, as he predicted, 1951 as the beginning of the Anthropocene will very likely be finally voted by the International Union of Geological Sciences as the latest geological age. And what is the consequence of that? The so-called transformation, acceleration of the geologic processes, environmental degradation, atmospheric composition change, and origin and growth of mega cities in the world, industrial scale agriculture, everything will get some kind of special attention from the scientific community, that they have to be very careful in their emission of deleterious gases that are not only unfit for humans, but for the vegetation, for the water, and millions of other living plant and animal species. So, by year 2024, geologists would have added what is called Anthropocene. Anthropology, anthropomorphic, Anthropocene. In other words, human influenced and accelerated process changes on the Earth's surface, getting the title of Anthropocene, and as not only a title, the title is good, but a warning by the scientific community that we have to be very careful in our activities, which has caused a global acceleration of the human-induced processes for the benefit of the humans and other living species, as well as future generations of humans from the threats of climate change caused consequences. It is not only sea level rise only. Now India is going through a climate change. This morning, in the Times of India newspaper, there was a small one-column, not one full column, quarter-page report that the Shiv link in Amarnath has completely melted. But that will not deter Indians from going to Amarnath the next year or year after next. Only point is, only the problem will be there will not be any ice-induced, ice-formed shriveling. The spot will be rocky instead of having a phallic symbol completely made of ice. So, this is what happens to a place of worship for almost practically majority of Indians. In the spring season, the reason is the Himalayan belt is undergoing unusually warmer climate, warmer days, warmer nights. That's the point. It used to be very cold days and extremely cold nights, just the opposite. And the consequences by being in Kerala are not conceived by or addressed even by the scientific community of Kerala. Unfortunately, I always believe that the society and the scientific community walks along parallel roads without converging. Of course, crores of rupees are spent on salaries and retirement benefits, but the government, policymakers, politicians, administrators very rarely get to know or attempt to know what the scientific community has brought out as the findings that were published in the national and international journals. However, there is a glimmer of hope for Keralites or the rest of Indians, because there is a government in Delhi which has a strong group of international level talented scientific advisors who fancy doing science as a passion or as a something like sannyasi, as the mantra of their daily life. Our Chandrayaan is an example. Vikram is hovering around the moon at a height of 100 kilometers from the Earth's surface. Within 4 days or so, on the 23rd August, hopefully we will see Vikram gently, softly landing on the lunar surface. Yes, that is an example of science. And most people worry now, why waste all the money in landing a mechanical device on the moon? Well, there is, of course, people have the liberty to think and pursue their thoughts along any line of thought they choose to think about. So that is a liberty. We are a liberal, independent country. People have opinion. But only thing is, most of the time the opinions are based on hearsay or something like God given. Well, I would now conclude that we are now living in the Anthropocene, and Anthropocene is the last geologic age. By next year on, in the stratigraphic column, in the timetable of the published by the International Union of Geological Sciences, Anthropocene will sit at the top as the youngest geologic epoch or geologic age. Thank you very much.